Hey guys, so today we're going to take a look at some advanced phase correction techniques. I'm sure you're probably all familiar with the typical, tom mic on the top side and bottom side, and you have to invert the phase. That's all well and good, that's all simple, but sometimes there's far more complicated things that you have to deal with, that you have to fix in post. So we're going to take a look at some of these more complicated scenarios and some ways that are maybe a bit more complicated to fix them, but ways that we can then streamline our workflow so that we can have repeatable results with very little effort once we go and do the initial setup. Okay, so let's get started. I'm using Cakewalk. I've been using Cakewalk for ages, but now it's Cakewalk by BandLab because BandLab took them over. So I've got loaded up this project. And this is what we're going to use for our example today. We're going to look at dealing with close mic isolation for cymbals, which is not something that is someone typically has to deal with, but it is sometimes an issue for phasing purposes. So this is a setup that I did. I had a direct mic on hi-hat and on my overheads. As you can see, I have just the hi-hat and the left cymbal is soloed right now. So that's the cymbal that was closest to the hi-hat. The overheads, these were using Earthworks. The hi-hat was using AKG C451. As you can see, that's the name of the project. That's when I was first reviewing this mic. So I've got these loaded up. I've soloed them. I've put them up the middle. I made the volume basically the same. Just so that we can kind of focus on these things and not really focus on the other instruments that might be going on. All right, so let's just take a quick listen to what we've got here. All right, so nothing surprising there, right? The volume is pretty much what we would probably expect, right? Let's check this one out too. So obviously there's a whole bunch of bleed going on here as well, right? But as you can probably assume, because of the distance between the hi-hat mic to the hi-hat and the overhead to the hi-hat, the sound source is going to get to the hi-hat significantly before the cymbal. Now, one thing you should probably keep in mind is that whenever you're doing direct miking and a room mic, you need to make sure that that room mic is at least 3 times the distance as the isolated mic, which here is not an issue, right? My direct cymbal mic is probably only a few inches away, so as long as my overhead is at least a foot away, it's fine, right? Which is, it's far more than a foot away in our case. So how do we want to deal with phase issues, right? What kind of phase issues are we going to face? Like I mentioned before, when you have a tom and you're direct top and bottom miking that tom, you're running into phase issues because the sine wave, right, the high part of the amplitude hits one mic, whereas the other mic is seeing the most negative part of the amplitude, right? So that's where you can go in. You can invert the phase directly on your track. And this actually works pretty good. Actually, it does not completely eliminate possibly all phase issues, but it gets rid of, most of what you're dealing with. But when you're direct miking and room miking or overhead miking something, you have a different sort of phase issue. And that's because it's not a mic positioning, it's not an angle of mic issue, it's a time issue. Right? Because the microphone picks up this signal and then this other microphone picks up another signal, the sine waves are significantly off time-wise. So what you need to do is you actually need to either move this one forward or you need to delay this one. All right, so let's just take a quick look at what's going on here. Let's zoom this way in, right? Okay, so as you can see in here, this microphone is getting a signal here, and this microphone was getting its signal over here. So there's a little bit of a difference between when one is getting it compared to the other. Now, because of the position of the microphone, there could be a position phasing issue as well, in addition to a time phasing issue. But certainly there's some sort of time phasing issue. So how would you fix this? Well, let me first tell you kind of the wrong way, or the way that I wouldn't recommend. You can go in here, right, and you could just grab this guy and you could shift it, right? You could be like, okay, where is this gonna line up? You know, is this good? Maybe a little bit more, right? Kind of keep moving around until you find the right spot, right? We'll just say for right now that that's closer. All right, let's compare that to before, right? So I'll just undo. And of course, this is part of the issue now. If I want to see what I did, right? So I have to undo or redo like 3 times to be able to check out the difference, to see whether or not it's actually doing what I want it to do. All right. So one thing that I could do, so I've done right here, I could just set up a loop. That makes things a little bit easier if I'm going to undo or redo things. Right, but of course then I have the problem with the loop might try to undo or redo too, depending on how my software works, right? So this becomes a bit of a pain. Now you could go in and be like, okay, I'm gonna really get nitty gritty. I'm gonna find the right spot and I'm just gonna make sure it's okay. The problem is, what happens if the drummer recorded multiple takes, right? Recorded the song in section. What if the band recorded a dozen songs? Having to go in and try to correct by hand every single one of these, it's going to be a nightmare, right? What happens if you do it and later on you're like, hey, you know what? I don't really like how this came out. I want to make more changes. You're going to be fighting this, right? You're going to be going crazy. So what do you want to do instead? You want to use a plugin. Now, this plugin that I use, this one's made by Universal Audio, or really actually there's a hardware version of this. And so this is an emulation of it. This is from a company, originally from a company called Little Labs. So I just brought up the mono version of this on the hi-hat channel. And this is actually a great tool. This is fantastic for dealing with phasing issues. You can actually see there's 2 different types of phasing problems. So this is the one you're probably typically used to dealing with, right? So this is like the tom scenario, right? So this is if everything's completely in phase, or if this is, this is like flipping the switch here, right? This is if everything was out of phase before. But you can go more granular than that, right? What if maybe if it just seems a little bit out of phase, or something doesn't quite seem right, if it was the microphone is off by 90 degrees or 45 degrees, right? You can kind of go in here and just play with it a little bit and just kind of see at what point maybe the sound is a little bit thicker, right? That should tell you that it's not subtracting out the signal between the 2 different tracks. But what we're really interested in here is this guy. This is going to add, as you can see, a delay adjustment, right? This is going to do a time shift in software by up to 4 milliseconds. And that is exactly what we want to do here, right? We want to basically delay the hi-hat to fix any timing issues. Now, after that, potentially there could be some phase adjustment issues that we have to clean up too. But for right now, let's just focus on this delay adjustment. So how are we going to figure out what this is, right? So, well, the first thing we could do is we could just try to do this by ear, right? So let's just go in here, right? And let's just set up a quick little loop. All right, so I'm going to bring this up to 2 milliseconds. And you can hear has a big effect on the sound. Now, whether or not that's an appropriate value, you can hear that it is by changing the timing, it is resulting in a change in phase, or some amount of phase cancellation, right? Whether it's getting summed or subtracted. So now the question is, how do you figure out how much, right? Maybe you're kind of going by ear, and that's all well and good, but maybe you're not totally sure. Maybe you don't trust your ears. You want to kind of be more scientific about it. So let's zoom back in on this project and take a look at what we can do here. So what we really need to do is we need to pick the points that we're going to be working with. And the points that we're going to work with is the samples. We're going to look at the sample of when the sound basically hit the hi-hat mic, when it hit the overhead mic, and we're going to subtract those two. And from that, we're going to know how many samples occur between the two. Now, this project, this was recorded in 48, right? So 48,000 or 48K, right? So 48,000 samples per second. So between those two things, we know how many seconds or how many milliseconds have occurred between these, the start of these two places, right? And so then we can basically dial in, roughly speaking, at least, that amount of delay on the Little Labs. All right, so first, we have to pick a point. Usually I would be maybe a little bit more careful on this, but let's just pick a point where I think maybe I'm not just dealing with kind of room noise, where I might actually be dealing with the signal. So I'm going to pick this point right here. Now what we need to do is we need to look at specifically, like I said, the samples. That's what we're going to be dealing with, right? So in Cakewalk, right in here on this view, I can choose what I want it to be displaying in, right? I could work with actually this kind of some sort of time code up here, but this is not quite accurate enough. So I find it's, and there's a millisecond thing here as well, but I find sometimes I have some issues with that. So we're gonna go complete, we're gonna go full nerd on this, right? We're gonna look at samples. So I'm gonna switch over to samples. And you can see as I click around in here, this little chart guy up here kind of changes, right? If I click around, there you go, it's moving. So this is how many samples, this is the sample point, I should say, at which we are at for the hi-hat signal, where this started, right? 6391971, right? So what I'm gonna do, I'm just gonna start off, I'm gonna just write this down. 6391971. All right. Now, let's look at the overhead mic. Let's find a spot that we're going to work with for that. And I'm going to pick right around here. So again, we're working with samples. And it looks like this is the guy I want for this one, right? So the second one gets hit at sample number 6392042. All right, so what are we going to do here? We're going to subtract these two. That's the number of samples in between. We have to divide between this, the number of samples, total number of samples, and the number of samples per second. That's going to give us the number of seconds, and then we can calculate further to get milliseconds. All right, so let's bring up the calculator. All right. So there's a 71 sample difference between those 2 points. All right, so let's write this down again. So remember, this is sample A, it was here. Sample B was here, right? So if we take sample A, we subtract sample B, that's going to equal to 71 samples. So now we got to do a little bit of division, right? We're going to do 71 divided by 48,000, right? So this is the number of samples, 71 samples, right? 71 samples. And we're going to divide by 48,000 samples per second, right? Samples and samples will cancel. Second goes up top. And that gives us this, number with way too many decimal places. We're going to multiply this by 1,000. And basically, this is the number of milliseconds that we're dealing with. It's roughly 1.5. So if we go back to the software now, and remember, it's roughly 1.5 milliseconds, right? I'll just quickly eyeball it for right now. This is about 1 All right, so this is going to be about 1.5. Let's play through this loop. And of course, now that I actually have this in software, I don't have to, go crazy trying to do an A/B comparison to be like, does this actually have any real effect, right? So we're just going to try bypassing this. We're going to play it with it off, with it on. We're going to see how it works. All right, so let me start with this guy off. On. Off. So the difference is subtle. I think if you really listen carefully, where you're going to notice it the most is probably in the lower frequencies. That's where it's probably going to be the most obvious for you. At least right now, that's where I'm hearing it. It almost seems more bass heavy once you put it on, but that's just because there's not so much phase cancellation there. Now you might think, well, I don't want all these low frequencies in my overheads or my hi-hats anyhow. If you want them gone, use EQ. Get rid of it with EQ. Don't do it with the phasing, because even though it might be obvious that the low end is coming in and out when you're correcting the phasing, what's not going to be so obvious are the other frequencies, in the sibilants, the higher end stuff. So, use the correct phasing. If you want frequencies gone, get rid of them with EQ. So of course, now that we have this, if we needed to, we could adjust the phase here as well. But, I think this is actually already giving us a pretty good start. So just to review again, so how did we come up with these numbers? So really what we dealt with was, and I'll go full nerd on this, right? So we're dealing with the absolute value of sample A minus sample B. And we divided that by the number of samples per second. And then we multiplied by 1,000. And then after that, we went into our Little Labs plugin. And just so you know, these dots, these are every 0.2, right? So if I want to get really technical here, I would say, okay, so this is, let's see. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, right? So right here is 1 millisecond. And then this is 1.2, this is 1.4, right? So I have to be like 1.5-ish. So it is kind of like somewhere around here that I'm dealing with. And that will be, it's not going to be, you're not going to have to worry about getting it to this level, but just getting it this far is going to get you a much better result. Okay, so let's take a look at some more samples. I just took a moment and I put my panning back, and I put some levels back a little bit, and I put back in some of my buses. So let's take a look at this inside of a mix and see how this sounds when we turn this on and off for some actual full beats. So on right now. So I can hear the difference in the low end frequencies as well on that beat for the hi-hat. Let's take a look at this guy over here. Right now it should be off right now. So even in there, I can hear how it's having an effect. So yeah, definitely fix phase issues on your cymbals. Even if you think it's small, you think it's subtle, when you're dealing with a lot of instruments in post, things are going to get buried or going to be harder to hear down the road if you don't take care of these problems. So I hope you guys found that useful. I hope maybe you learned something today. I have other content like this as well, so please check out my channel. Other recording techniques, microphone reviews, ways for isolating your room. So if you're interested in recording at home, you might find some useful info in those videos as well. I have other types of content as well, lesson videos and cymbal reviews, stick reviews, playthroughs, all sorts of different things. And I'm always putting out more content, so please check out my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. And if there's anything specific that you might be looking for, any recording technique stuff that you're trying to figure out, let me know in the comments below. I'll try to throw something together for you. And until then, peace.